I'd like to call the meeting to order. Tonight, we will recite the Pledge of Allegiance. In following the Pledge of Allegiance, I'd like to observe a moment of silence for those that were killed and wounded in the worst mass murder incident in the history of the United States. And we're also thankful tonight because one of our colleagues who was in Las Vegas at the time, remember Brian Clenahan, made it through, and we're happy to have him back with us tonight. And Brian, we'd like to ask you to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the moment of silence.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mr. Best.
Here.
Mallett. Here. Meeting. Brent. Here. Higgins. Hogan. Here. Raymond. Here. Lockhart. Mariello. Here. Lane. Miller. O'Brien. Reimer. Signer. Simpson. Here. Stevens. Touche. Honey. Ward. Willingham.
Yes.
Secretary.
Thank you. I'd like to note that additional sponsors have been filed with the clerk under previous business. Resolution 266A.
Ready, Rule 2, the Albany County Legislative Rules.
Mr. Mendy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise just for a procedural aspect of this. Last year in March, we adopted Resolution 83, which talked about the transparency requirements for amended resolutions. That was going to wind out things, we highlighted them. This comes to us without any of those indications of changes. The resolution is too important to try to send it back for any kinds of changes, but I hope in the future that we attempt to make sure that those things are accomplished before it comes to the legislature.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Mr. Ball.
On the part of this resolution where we televise the public meetings, the public forums, I think that is really important, that we should have been doing this. I'm glad we're doing it tonight, Sean. It's one of the most important parts of our meeting. And, you know, I agree with one of the speakers that we should combine the beginning of the meeting and start the beginning of the meeting with the public forum. Since we're taking attendance there also, we should not deny the right of our folks that watch these meetings the right to say the Pledge of Allegiance, because many of them won't be able to because they'll leave after they speak. So I think it's very important that we pass this tonight. I'm for the entire resolution, and I think it's about time that we televise these public forums. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bullock. All those in favor of Resolution 266A signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, resolution passes. Thank you. Under current business, Resolution 375.
Authorizing agreement with Holly Dining to supply a water purification system to Clifford.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, resolution passes. 376.
Authorizing agreement with Otis Elevator Company Inc. for elevator preventive maintenance for various county buildings.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, resolution passes. 377.
Authorizing agreement with E.W. Tompkins Inc. for mechanical construction portion of the boiler replacement project to the judicial center.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, resolution passes. 378.
Authorizing an agreement with the New York State Department of Health regarding reimbursement for administrative costs pertaining to the early intervention program.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 379.
Authorizing an agreement with the South School regarding family assessment intervention services.
Mr. Miller.
I'd like to make a motion with group 379 through 392.
I think we have to vote on 379 separate. We'll do 380.
Okay.
All those in favor of 379? Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Miller, I'll reconsider your motion for 380 through 392. We have a motion. Do we have a second to group those?
Yes.
Many. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? All those in favor of resolutions 380 through 392 signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Those resolutions pass. Thank you. $393, please.
Under Resolution 373 for 2016 regarding additional foster care providers for children in Albany County.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. 394.
Amending 2017 Department of Children, Youth and Families budget.
All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Resolution passes. Please, Mr. 395.
Authorizing an agreement with the Research Foundation of the State University of New York regarding juvenile detention alternatives.
All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Resolution passes. 396.
Amending 2017 Department of Children, Youth and Families budget.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 397.
Authorizing agreements regarding moving and storage services for eligible temporary assistance recipients.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 398.
Authorizing an agreement with Equinox Inc. regarding non-residential domestic violence services.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 399.
Authorizing an agreement with Equinox Inc. regarding residential domestic violence services.
398. 399. All those in favor of 399?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. $400, please.
Authorizing the acceptance of grant funding and agreement with the New York State Office for Aging regarding the Health Insurance Information Counseling and Assistance Program.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 401.
Authorizing an agreement with Civil Care Services Group regarding case management review services and nursing home.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes. 402.
Authorizing an agreement with New York State Industries for the Disabled Link for Lynn Metal and Resident Locating.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 403.
Authorizing an agreement with Click Care Technologies Inc. regarding electronic medical records and financial software.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 404.
Authorizing the acceptance of amenities for Boy Scouts for the Anthony Pond and the Albany County Hillsborough Hudson Rail Trail.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 405, please.
Authorizing an agreement with the Homeless and Travelers Society regarding case management services for the county reentry program.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 406.
Authorizing an agreement with New York State Canal Corporation regarding reimbursement for marine patrol services.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 407.
Authorizing an agreement with New York State Governor Traffic Safety Committee regarding the police traffic services grant.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes. 408.
Authorizing an agreement with New York State Governor's Traffic Safety Committee regarding a child passenger safety program grant.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 409.
Authorizing the execution of waiver regarding burden justice assistant grant funding and authorizing the city of Albany to accept grant funds directly.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 410.
Authorizing an agreement with New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services regarding the 2017 State Homeland Security Program, State Law Enforcement Terrorism Prevention Program, and amending the 2017 Albany County Sheriff's Budget.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
No match.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 411, please.
Authorizing an agreement with the Connecticut County Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals for the donation of body armor for the Albany County Probation Department.
All those in favor? Those opposed? Resolution passes 412.
Authorizing agreements with various vendors to begin electronic recording at the Albany County Clerk's Office.
All those in favor? Those opposed? Resolution passes 413.
Amending 2017 Albany County Clerk's Budget.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 414.
Amending 2017 Albany County District Attorney's Budget.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 415.
Authorizing an agreement with New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services for the 2017 State Homeland Security Program.
No,
Amending the
Mr.
2017 Department of Information Services Budget.
Sorry, I
Oh.
interrupted you. It's a long one. No, Mr. Andrew Joyce's abstention. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 416.
Amending 2017 Department of Health Budget.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 417.
Authorizing an agreement with Better Health in New York, Northeast New York, Inc. regarding behavioral health stabilization project and amending 2017 Mental Health Department.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 418.
Authorizing the conveyance of real property located at 293 Orange Street and 295 Orange Street in the city of Albany.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 419.
Authorizing the conveyance of real property located at 518 Buzzing Kill Road in the town of Knox.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 420.
Authorizing the purchase of real property in the town of Bethlehem for the Albany County Rail Trail.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 421.
Authorizing the conveyance of real property in the town of Gilman on 30 Main Street.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 422.
Authorizing the conveyance of real property located at 8 Pearson Avenue in the town of Albany.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 423.
Authorizing and directing the Board of Elections to certify its expenses regarding the 2016 elections.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 424.
Public hearing on proposal of Law H for 2017.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 425.
Public hearing on proposal of Law I for 2017.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 426.
Designating the Audit and Finance Committee to review the tentative annual budget for 2018.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 427.
Public hearing on the 2018 tentative annual budget.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 428.
Public hearing on proposed legislative additions and/or deletions to the 2018 tentative annual budget.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Resolution passes 429.
Amending Resolution 326 for 2017, authorizing a license agreement to Stewart Shop Corp. to continue to use the property at 309 Delaware Avenue, Delaware.
Mr. Sigarachi.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to refer this back to committee for just to clear up some conversation on going back to court, so we can send this back to committee.
I will do that. I'd like to refer this back to what finance, Ms. Cunningham?
Can I just ask a question of the nature of the referring it back to committee? It looks like that the lease renewal, there's just an addition of a 3-year option to renew. Is that the only material difference from what was reported out of committee? And
I think the majority office is interested in looking at the history of the lease. They want to take a better look at that. I don't think it's in the problem where we're for another moment. Thank you. Local law?
Local law P, 2016, a local law to help address the wage gap between women and men by prohibiting employers from requiring job applicants to provide higher permanent salary information before offering them employment.
Mr. Cochran?
I just wanted to share a little bit more information. You heard tonight from the League of Women Voters, you heard from the Solidarity Committee, and I have a letter to their endorsement you heard from the union. And I also would like to add that the Capital District chapter of Citizen Action endorses this, as does the Working Families Capital District. So, I think we've heard quite a lot about it, and I'm not going to belabor any of the most important issues, but I just think what is important is that we try to level the playing field for anybody entering the workforce at any time for any reason. And I see no reason why we can't do that, and I think we should set the precedent and set the bar high. And yes, as one of our speakers said, it isn't going to change the world overnight, but I think it's a good first step in making it equal for everyone. So I'm hoping that we can all come out and vote for this tonight, and I'm counting on your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Mr. Cunningham?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I am very happy to join my colleagues, Ms. Lukakis and Ms. Cunningham, in advancing this local law. This local law will help ensure that Albany County is a true leader in the fight for pay equity, and that Albany County job applicants will have a more and just hiring process. It is truly unbelievable that we're still fighting about pay equity in 2017. But I mentioned this a couple of months ago, and it's worth mentioning again. Pay Equity Day this year was April 4th. And that is how far in 2017 the average woman has to work to make the same money that a man made in 2017 or 2016. But as bad as this date is, and it is unacceptable, there's room for optimism in this. Pay Equity Day in 2016 was actually 412. And the wage gap has dropped 15 points in the last 24 years. Progress is being made. And part of that progress is due to increased awareness and really addressing this problem. But a lot of the progress is because of proactive legislation like this. Several states and several local municipalities have enacted local laws in various ways pushing forward for pay equity. And we can see in those numbers that this is making a difference. And this is why this local law tonight is so important. We really have to continue to fight the wage gap until there's pay equity for women and people of color throughout the country, particularly in Albany County. And we are in a unique position here. We're right in the shadow of the Capitol. Tonight, if we pass this, we can join the New York City Council in leading New York State to about 55–60% of its population and having real pay equity laws similar to this one. And hopefully we can drive the state to take similar action. But Albany County has always taken a proactive approach towards fairness and equality, and this is another example of that tonight, and I look forward to everyone's support in moving forward with this.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham. Mr. O'Brien?
Could you have me as a sponsor, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Bergdorf?
I just have a question for the sponsors. I understand that this applies to everyone who does business in Albany County. Is that correct?
Yes.
So the state legislature will be subject to this?
Yes.
The governor's office? The attorney general's office? And if they were to violate this, they would be in violation of the New York State human rights law.
In Albany County.
Mr. Bergdorf, I believe New York State has actually enacted this for state employees already. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Okay.
So every municipality, every public employee, every school district, I'm just curious about the
Every
application.
business, every restaurant,
This is every employer in Albany County.
Okay, public and private.
That's correct.
Just one correction. This would be a violation of the Albany County human rights.
Human rights law.
We don't enforce the state rights.
Okay, but then someone, if they went for an interview someplace in state government, they could potentially, if someone were to ask them a question that was wrong, they could be violating the Albany County Human Rights Law.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair,
Ms. McClaney?
who's the enforcing agency?
The Albany County Human Rights Commission, I understand. Ms. McClaney?
Thank you very much for recognizing me, Chairman. I hate to sort of compare this to myself, but my own wage gap has existed consistently since the job that I took, and I finally realized what was happening in New York City back in 2004. I took a position, they asked me what I made before. I thought I was getting this great pay raise until I learned 6 months later that there was another woman who was actually younger than me, but had come from another organization that had hired her, who was making $25,000 more than me in the exact same general manager position. And of course, I have been asked every single time, every single employer or private sector, what I have made before. Certainly, people were trying to fit me into their budgets, and we have not made this a priority until now in Albany County. But what I also like about this law is it doesn't just pertain to women. It pertains to everybody in Albany County being paid an appropriate salary for the job for which someone is hiring. And within that, it's not just trying to find out, can I get this person for less? Or can I fit them into my budget? It's, this is my budget. This is the salary I'm paying, and this is for which I'm hiring. And in that small way, hopefully we can rectify a little bit of the pay inequity that doesn't just exist for women, it exists across the board to a certain extent. And so I'm greatly supporting this. I thank my colleague, Ms. Lakakis, for bringing this forward. And I will be voting in the affirmative, and I encourage my fellow legislators to do the same. Additionally, I do believe that there was a question posed earlier about how would someone be able to move forward as, with a violation of the human rights, as the Albany County Human Rights law, is that usually you find legal representation to be able to rectify your situation. So hopefully that will be helpful in moving forward.
Thank you. Ms. Cunningham?
I am very happy to support this legislation. I was very glad to be an original sponsor with my colleagues, Susan Congress and Iraqi and Chairman Brian Cunningham. Just to put a little face on it, this is something that affects probably more people than any of you really realize. And let me just paint a little bit of an example like Allie just did. If you are somebody that took a little bit of a break in your career path, perhaps to stay home with your children, and you are entering the workforce, you have a little bit of a gap on your resume. That can be exploited by somebody very easily by saying, why don't you tell me about your salary history in the 10 years or 5 years that you were missing a piece of that salary history. And, you may have stepped off the career track as an attorney, as a professional engineer, as somebody who cuts hair at the top of their, of their capacity in a salon. But because you all of a sudden stepped off that path, you don't have that history for whatever period it was. I do hiring right now myself, and I don't ask when I'm hiring individuals what their salary history was. It's a real easy question to avoid. The job that I'm proposing, the job that I'm advertising for, has a salary range. And you as an individual coming in to interview for that have certain skills, talents, capacities, work history, academic credentials, and otherwise that put you in that range. And based on your experience and your credentials, and quite honestly, how you interview, I'm assessing as the employer where I think you fit in that salary range. I think it's a mindset that we as employers, we as participants in the workforce just need to adapt to. It's in many ways no different than the fact that an employer can't say to a woman prospective candidate, so are you planning to have children anytime soon? That is precluded by law. And there's a reason for that, because that would be a discriminatory action to take for a woman candidate. But this is something that has real impact for your constituents, even if you haven't interacted with them or asked them about it. I'll give you another example. My own husband took 12 years off the career track to stay home with our children. He's a professional engineer with military experience and a whole portfolio of experience level. Why should that 12 years he took off the career path, it doesn't diminish his expertise, his academic credentials, his professional engineering credentials, his military background, his management experience, his leadership experience. Why should that detract from another candidate? Now, another candidate may have work experience that would be valuable, but if you look at an individual and the totality of what they're offering in their portfolio, you know, the job is worth a certain amount of money in the range. And the fact that someone stepped off the career path for a little bit of time should not be resulting in the fact that they're discounted in what they can attract in the marketplace. So I'm in strong support of this. I urge folks to think about the real life impact that it has, not just for women, not just for people of color, as is noted in the bill resolution language, but also for anybody in your district that has taken a brief break from the workforce for any reason, for caring for a family member. And the fact that this will allow their record as an employee, as a prospective employee, to stand on its own, rather than the piece of information which is, well, tell me how much you made in your last job. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Joyce. No?
Do you know what
Mr.
your name is?
Yes. Mr. Demowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to support this and happy to co-sponsor this legislation. Wish it was here 40 years ago. Back in the 70s, when I was first starting to work, everything was attach your salary history to your resume, send it in. I mean, it was very commonplace. Always bothered me, but that's the way of the world. The other thing is, are we going to have department heads? Because we have many department heads, and their salaries fluctuate all over the county. Now, does this give them an opportunity to come in, no matter who it may be, because whoever the top guy is, will look at the budget and look at it and say, all right, everybody, I'm a department head, I'm making 60,000. Here's a department here making 80, here's a department here making 90, here's a department here making 100. How come I'm not making 100? So, what happens then? So is this going to open up a whole opportunities for people, which is fine because we come along, but I think it's a good local law. People should be hired and paid on their merit of the job, and that's the way I've always hired people, and I think it's great, and I look forward to working with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Demowitz. Mr. Kraus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to commend the sponsors of this legislation. I think it's an important bill for us to be considering. Something that Ms. Ms. Cunningham mentioned was that, yes, what you pay should be based upon your experience, your skill, things of that nature. I'm curious as to how this bill would treat the area of sales, and by that I mean commissions, because the basis upon which someone is judged as a salesperson is based upon their commissions, how well they've done. And as a prospective employer, I think I might want to know whether or not the salesperson I'm hiring is successful, and the only way I know that is by the commissions they've earned. I think all the other jobs out there is pretty straightforward. You're a mechanic, you fix things, you're an engineer, you build some things. But when it comes to someone whose livelihood depends upon their success in selling a product, and the only way that's measured is by the commission they make, I don't know how to deal with that with this legislation. I've had some conversations about this with Mr. Clennahan, and we discussed it briefly, but I'm wondering if there's a way that can be addressed, because I don't know how you do that any other way. And I'm certainly interested in hearing any other thoughts, but in that particular area, what does one do? How does one judge hiring a salesperson without knowing how successful they've been? And the only way you know that is by the commissions they've earned. And again, it's not a gender situation. It's just I'm either successful or I'm not so successful. Well, if you're not so successful, I don't think I want to hire you. But so I'm just opening that up, and I'm just curious to what Mr. Clennahan might have to say about that.
Mr. Chairman.
If
I don't want to jump the line.
the others don't mind deferring, Mr. Quinney, go ahead.
I don't want to jump the line.
If you have an answer.
I think Mr. Kraus raises a good question, and it's worth noting that in terms of the fight to pay equity, this is a relatively new tool. It's only been passed so far by the state of Massachusetts, New York City Council, and passed, but I don't think enacted yet by Philadelphia. So I think there are some details to be worked out in how this is enforced, and we'll look at how these things are being done in Massachusetts and New York City. But I think moving forward on this particular question, I'd be happy to work with Mr. Kraus in terms of rules and regulations as to how the Human Rights Commission enforces this to address these concerns, but not undermine our overarching goal of the equity of this. And I feel there's a way to do that, and I'm happy to work together towards that goal.
Thank you. Mr. Reinhardt?
I am very proud and happy to be a supporter of this as well. I would like to say, many people have already spoken. I think Gary Demolis stole my thunder a little bit, because I was going to make the observation that no one else had until Gary, that this actually is a way to hire based on merit. Because you're not looking at history, you're only looking at based on the qualifications to do the work and that they meet your needs as the employer. So I think that's a positive. To answer your question, I would argue it's actually quite simple. If I'm a salesperson and I'm being interviewed, or if I'm on the other side of the table, you don't have to ask dollars. You can ask, how did you affect market share? How many units did you sell? There are other ways you can talk about sales without attaching a dollar to it. I don't think that's going to be an issue, because if you're in that business, you're going to want to know, if I hire this guy or gal, is it going to be increasing my success in the marketplace, market share? Is it going to be selling more units than I was selling before? And if the guy has a history, or a salesperson has a history of that, that's how you can answer. You don't have to talk dollars.
Mr. Drake?
I was just going to note that from a business perspective, Mr. Kraus brought up the question. You can simply ask for sales dollars, and it can be in dollars. You're not asking what pay they received. You don't know what their cut was, but did you sell 400 million in airplane parts? Did you sell 200 million? So maybe that helps.
Ms. McQueen?
I wanted to add on to Mr. Drake's comments. Thank you. You mentioned a few of them that I was going to make, and I appreciate that. The other thing is generally when I would do hiring in a sales-related position, I manage a cosmetic dermatology center with a lot on sales, is that we paid what the role was, but usually we would call the prior employer and ask, would you hire this person again? Yes or no? We actually wouldn't go into salary history there. I've been in other employment where we have. This was hiring specifically for sales-related positions. And usually, and I do agree, what you can do is how long were they there? Do they have personal recommendations from any of their vendors, et cetera? Do they have recommendations, obviously, from their employer? Would you hire this person again? I think there are many ways in which you could do that. And there are other ways, such as, did you meet your sales goals?
I was just going to suggest that they can be quotas can be set.
Yes.
Did I see Mr. Berger?
Mr. Chairman, I was only going to mention, I was intrigued by Mr. Krause's argument because I found some merit in it, but salespeople are not the only people whose compensation is limited to production. I've recently, people know that I'm involved in a lot of the animal welfare stuff. You know, veterinarians now, the new veterinary corporate structures hire veterinarians as independent contractors, and they get a percentage of the fees that they generate. So there is a potential opportunity where someone can come in and interview for a veterinary position and ask, what is your book of business? Who will you bring with you? What kind of compensation will you bring to a practice? Those sorts of discussions happen all the time. They also happen, and the one thing that gave me some solace in this, because I generally don't believe we should be telling business how to operate, was the fact that they did this in New York City. And there's probably not a more diversified community with bigger and more complicated businesses. And I thought primarily of the finance industry, where somebody's hiring a managing director where a range of a salary could be $400,000 to $2 million based on what you've done, what you've produced, what you've sold, how many people you've managed. So those are intrinsic parts of an interview and in part of the decision-making process. And you know, and I'm going to support this. I would hope that in our zeal to do something that puts us on the cutting edge, we at least have whatever staff is going to be charged with reviewing this or policing this, learn from the more sophisticated municipalities who have most of the people in the finance industry, most of the people in the banking industry, most of the people in the restaurant service industry, because probably if it's being administered there, there's less new ground for us to plow in Albany County. So I would urge you, in whatever discussions you have with the county executive staff, to sort of reach out and get that sort of input in implementing this law.
Mr. Bowie?
I rise in support of this local law. I think everything that has been said tonight in support of it, and I appreciate a unanimous vote on this. I co-sponsored on it from the beginning. It's very important. It's time we level the playing field. Don't worry about enforcement. Enforcement is out there. And, you know, there's problems with salary. I mean, there's a piecework, too, that a lot of workers do. And, you know, it's hard to determine, but an employer can just go back to the company and find out if they're meeting production quotas or sales quotas or anything else. So I don't think they deserve, employers absolutely need salary information, and it's important that we support this.
Thank you, Mr. Bowie. Mr. Drake?
You know, just a point of note, an awful lot of presumption is often taken by members of this body as it pertains to the other members of this body. Ms. Cunningham said, more than any of you know. Well, she doesn't know if that's true. Mr. Bullock said, everything's been said that needs to be said. Just pointing that out. But there is a little more to be said. How are we going to disseminate the information? Will it go with labor postings that come from New York State? Will it go with a separate labor posting? Can I ask the sponsors? I am in support of this bill, but I'd like to know kind of what, along the lines of Paul is going, is how do we get this out there? How, you know, what are going to be, all the postings I get as an employer, they come from the state, you know, presently, whether it be minimum wage, whether it be, you know, hiring practices.
Department of Labor postings every week, right?
So is that going to come out as a mailing to businesses? How are we going to make people aware that this is out there? Not just enforcing when someone missteps. How are we going to educate them so that they don't misstep? That's my question, and I'd like to be added as a comment.
Thank you. Mr. Fun?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of this local law. One of the reasons I like it so much is because there's already existing laws requiring fair wages between men and women, and it's easy to pass a law doing that, but this is a very creative way to actually solve the problem of the wage gap. And another reason I like it is because, while it is, many people brought this up tonight, but while it is targeted towards closing the wage gap between men and women, it will really benefit any group of people who has historically been discriminated against, such as minorities, and it will also, as people brought up, really affect anyone who's been paid less for whatever reason, less than they deserve. I've always been aware that as a white man, I'm probably treated favorably.
Tall white man, tall.
I was going to bring that up. As a white man, I've been treated favorably, most likely in these types of situations. I learned tonight, because I'm 6'1", I'm treated even more favorably. And even though that is the case, I believe in fairness, so I think it's important to pass a law like this. I don't want to benefit from something that really has nothing to do with my own merit, and I think everyone has to be treated fairly. I also want to point out, similar to what Mr. Drake just brought up, I think we do, as a legislature, have to work with the Human Rights Commission to ensure that we get the word out about this law. We need to make sure employers know that this is something that they have to follow. I'm not sure if they'll find out by the article that may be put in the Times-Union tomorrow or some Facebook posts. I think there has to be a more coordinated outreach effort. Otherwise, we can't expect that they will follow this law. Thank you.
Thank you. I have never thought height was a deterrent, for the record. Mr. Grimm?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just want to be clear what we're doing here, because I hear a lot about the wage gap, which of course is a significant issue. But that's not what this restriction is about. This restriction applies equally to men and women. It applies equally to black or white. It applies equally to rich or poor, Christian or Jew. So I want to be clear about that. Now, employers, I was a TV anchor man for a long time. They don't have a salary schedule for that. My salary is what I could negotiate with my news director. I've been a business owner for 15 years. Every day I negotiate. And one of the things I've learned is if they know how much you're making, the employer has an advantage. I know that from being an employer myself. So now, an employer has a right to limit labor cost. That's, in fact, their responsibility. But they don't have a right to an unfair advantage. And that advantage is asking someone what their salary is, because the first person who puts the number on the table loses in negotiation. So I support this, but I want to be clear, it's for everyone, and that lies at the strength of this proposal. Thank you.
Mr. Clay? Yes, sir. Have we said everything that needs to be said?
Mr. Drake. Mr. Drake's got
Drake, are we all set? Mr. Simpson, I shouldn't have asked.
No, this is a very, very serious issue, and I think there's a little bit of confusion about it. The issue is an issue of equity and fairness. For a long time, I've advocated that the county use a salary grade system similar to that used by the state. And the state happens to be one of the highest employers now that the federal government has been downsized so significantly. And I'll just share with people the position that I had back in 2001 now pays pretty close to $100,000. That's just the way it goes in terms of the appropriate cost of living. But one of the first things former President Barack Obama had to do was pass the Lilly-Ledbetter Act. Because what had happened was the Republican Congress had changed the EEOC standard, which said that a person can file a discrimination complaint once they're made aware of the discrimination. That was changed to say that there's a specific time period that a person can file a complaint, and whether they knew or not that they were being discriminated against, if they missed that time period, they would be out. And that necessitated the need for the Lilly-Ledbetter Act. The issue is to stop discrimination and to create a fair playing field. One of the things that would happen if we had, for example, a salary grade system is, then people would have to be paid exactly the same amount for the same job. That's really the basic issue. Somebody can be doing the exact same work or work of equivalent difficulty and sophistication, but be paid vastly different amounts based on the particular group that they're with. So I hope at some point we can revisit this issue, because the issue of transparency eliminates the possibility of unlawful discrimination. But I'm in wholehearted support of moving forward and having a more equitable distribution of resources.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Mr. Kraus?
I will be brief. I just wanted to rise and thank all the members who spoke in response to my question. It was clarifying, it was bipartisan, and it certainly has led me to the point where I will be supporting this legislation as well. So I want to thank them.
Thank you, Mr. Kraus. One roll call, please.
Heston.
Favor?
Bullock.
Yes.
Kirkegaard.
Aye.
Chapman. Blake.
Yes.
Lyon.
Yes.
Grissom.
Yes.
Kraus.
Yes.
Cunningham.
Yes.
Lawson.
Yes.
Malowitz.
Yep.
Drake.
Yes.
Duncan. Yes. Deisinger.
Yes.
Keenan.
Yes.
Stein.
Yes.
Grimm.
Yes.
Higgins. Aye. Otis.
Yes.
Andrew.
Yes.
Raymond.
Yes.
McCacken.
Yes.
Lockman. Morel.
Yes.
Mayo.
Yes.
McKnight.
Yes.
McLean.
Yes.
And Dick.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
O'Brien.
Yes.
Reinhardt. Absolutely. Cigarette.
Yes.
Simpson. Smith.
Yes.
Stevens.
Yes.
Shay. Yes. Money. Yes. Ward.
Yes.
Filligan. Unanimous.
Do we have a motion to adjourn? Second? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you.